A Brexit backlash in the local elections. Both the Conservatives and Labour are punished at the polls. Between them, the main parties have lost hundreds of council seats. Voters apparently fed up with the deadlock at Westminster.
Why don't you resign?
The Prime Minister faces a call to resign from one Conservative activist. She says voters have sent a message to politicians.
These were always going to be difficult elections for us, and there were some challenging results for us last night, but it was a bad night for Labour too. And I think people were sending a very clear message, a simple message, to both main parties, to us and the Labour Party: just get on and deliver Brexit.
Some of them were local factors, and some of them were people probably disagreeing with both parties on attitudes towards the European Union.
The big winners have been smaller parties like the Liberal Democrats, the Greens and also independent candidates. While results are still coming in, we'll be analysing what they tell us about the current political landscape, also this lunchtime. Hello, good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Both the Conservatives and Labour have faced a backlash at the local elections, with voters apparently punishing them for the Brexit deadlock. Both parties have suffered significant losses, while the main winners have been smaller parties like the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, as well as independents. The Prime Minister says voters were showing they want politicians to get on and deliver Brexit. Well, nearly 9,000 council seats have been up for grabs in England and Northern Ireland. Well, the counting is still underway, but so far the Conservatives have lost more than 500 seats and Labour are down more than 70. It's been a good night for the Lib Dems, who've gained more than 350, and the Greens, who've won 69 there. Now, UKIP have lost more than 50 councillors, while independent candidates have won over 250 seats. Let's get more on the results and their implications. Here's our political correspondent, Chris Mason.
Just look at those faces. The Conservatives held Swindon and gained North East Lincolnshire, but they lost control in St Albans, Southend, Broxtowe, Peterborough, Worcester, Basildon and elsewhere.
These were always going to be difficult elections for us, and there were some challenging results for us last night, but it was a bad night for Labour too. And I think people were sending a very clear message, a simple message, to both main parties, to us and the Labour Party: just get on and deliver Brexit. Thank you.
Not all of her colleagues here at the Welsh Conservative Conference are altogether supportive, though.
Thank you, everybody. And
why don't you resign? The National Convention want you, we don't want you.
Mrs May told to her face she should go. Tradition dictates the day after elections, party leaders head to where they won. Here's Jeremy Corbyn in Trafford in Greater Manchester. But Labour lost control in Hartlepool, the Wirral and Bolsover.
We have won Trafford to an overall majority. We have swings to Labour in a number of boroughs across the whole of councils across the whole of the country, and that gives us a basis on which we can win marginal seats such as Swindon, such as Thurrock and other places, and I'm looking forward to an election that we do that.
It's not exactly been a laugh a minute for the Liberal Democrats in recent years, but they're upbeat today.
Well, I'm just celebrating a really great result here. Chelmsford, Essex, but this story across the country. You know, the Lib Dems were written off at one point, but we're coming back very, very strongly. We're the big winners of the night.
The Lib Dems won control of councils in Bath, Winchester, North Norfolk and the Cotswolds. Independents have done well so far, as has the Green Party.
We've broken through on 16 new councils, really cementing our place as the fourth party in England in local government, and a real momentum, I think, going into the European elections. Of course, we're the biggest representation of any Remain party in the European Parliament at the moment.
It's been tough so far for UKIP. They've gone backwards.
Yes, we've lost some seats, but also we've made some gains in Sunderland. We've made a few gains there, and actually when you look at the results of areas like Sunderland, where we didn't win, we got a lot of second places, so they're good and bad across the board.
If you go down the middle channel.
There are plenty more results to come, with the parties watching closely, peering into what it might mean for their wider fortunes, and doing so through the giant prism of Brexit. Oh, and here, at daft o'clock in the morning, was this some cross-party collaboration, or perhaps commiseration? Chris Mason, BBC News.
Well, let's get the thoughts of our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, at Westminster. Norman, is this a case of the voters saying to Labour and the Conservatives, a plague on both your houses?
Well, I think one thing's clear, Ben, and that is many voters are absolutely fed up to the back teeth of the two main parties, footling about with Brexit and getting absolutely nowhere. Much less clear is what on earth Messrs Corbyn and May are actually going to do now, despite, you know, both their teams saying, we get it, we know people want Brexit sorted. It seems to me actually both are still paralysed by the divisions and splits in their own ranks from doing anything. And if anything, last night's results seems to have entrenched the divisions, with Labour Leave supporters saying, well, look, we lost all those votes in our northern heartlands. We've got to get off the fence and unequivocally back Brexit. Labour Remain are saying, well, hang on a sec, a lot of parties who back Remain actually did rather well. We've got to back a referendum. And then on the Tory side, Mrs May's lot saying, well, the only way we break the deadlock is to do a deal with Labour. And Brexiteers saying, in effect, don't you dare do that, and already renewing calls for Mrs May to go. And it seems to me, for all the electorate shouting at the two main parties, do something, both Mrs May and Mr Corbyn are like two startled, bug-eyed rabbits stuck in the middle of the road with a great big TIR lorry, horn blaring, headlights on full beam, thundering towards them. And that TIR lorry is called the European elections in a fortnight's time, which I suspect are going to make last night's result look like a stroll in the park for the two main parties.
All right, Norman, thank you. Norman Smith there, our assistant political editor. Well, the Conservatives have suffered most of their losses across the south of England. In Winchester, the Liberal Democrats took control of the City Council from the Tories, picking up 6 seats from them. Labour also gained seats. From Winchester, our correspondent, Duncan Kennedy.
Liberal Democrats, 1718.
Democracy by numbers, and that number triggered the change of power in Winchester. The Lib Dems took control from the Conservatives, with voter anger over Brexit propelling the shift.
There was a bit of anger over Brexit, and I suspect a number of people didn't vote because of that.
The losing Conservatives have analysed it the same way, unable to persuade voters to see past Brexit.
People were very upset with the politicians not being able to come to a positive conclusion on a deal to leave the European Union.
The Winchester result was a small piece of political history in a place that used to be the centre of English power. But whilst you don't have to go back to the 9th century, when this chap, Alfred the Great, was king of everything around here, to find political upset, the Conservatives have been in control here for nearly a decade. And all that in an area that voted 60-40 to remain inside the European Union. But even in a place with such pro-European tastes, one word, yes, that one, was on everyone's lips.
Brexit.
Brexit?
Obviously Brexit.
Why do you think the Lib Dems took control here in Winchester?
I think the majority of people are cheesed off with Conservatives at the moment with the way they're handling Brexit.
Why do you think it went the way it did?
Because she isn't doing what she should do, even though I am Conservative.
She being?
Well, Theresa.
Whatever kind of world it is one that saw quite a change here. Protest, message sending, well, add your own label. No one seems to have the monopoly anymore on political wisdom. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News in Winchester.
And meanwhile, Labour has lost ground in parts of the north of England and the Midlands. The party lost its majority on Wirral Council, losing 3 seats to the Conservatives and the Greens. From there, Judith Moritz reports.
Labour's control of the Wirral was only hanging by a thread. Before last night, it had a majority of just 1 seat. So wins here for other parties were enough to push the left out of power and the council into no overall control.
I think what we've seen tonight in many of the wards is, there's a disillusionment, unfortunately, with the established parties, particularly in the light of what's going on nationally with Brexit. And those smaller parties, the protest parties, the Greens, etc., have benefited from that.
It was the Greens who gained the most, snatching 2 seats from Labour.
I think it's a tipping point now for the Green Party, certainly in Wirral, and it looks like in many parts of the country as well. People are seeing what it's like to have Green representation. They see what Green councillors can achieve, and they really like it, and they want more of it, and they're voting for it.
The Greens did best here in Birkenhead and Tranmere. The idea of them having 2 out of 3 councillors in this area would have been unthinkable until recently. But if there's been a Brexit backlash, Labour's also been punished locally for its part in a planning row, proposing to build on Greenbelt land. Voters we spoke to said they hadn't been turned off politics altogether.
But locally, it's got to be the Green for around here, definitely.
I wouldn't say that there's issues nationally with just Labour. There's issues with all the parties.
There've been splits within Labour's left and central factions in this area, and that may have been a factor too. Now both the local party and the whole council chamber are deeply divided. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Birkenhead.
Well, counting is underway in Northern Ireland's council elections. Let's go straight to our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy, who's in Belfast. Emma, what's the latest there?
Well, votes being counted for 11 councils across Northern Ireland, and the predictions were that Northern Ireland wouldn't experience the same kind of Brexit effect that's being seen elsewhere. That's largely expected to be because so much about the way many people vote here is based on whether you're a unionist or nationalist voter, so that changes the dynamic a little bit, puts a dampening effect on any potential swing. And in recent years, the trend has been towards the 2 largest parties, the DUP and Sinn Féin, with support diminishing for the Ulster Unionist Party and the SDLP. So support is expected to hold up for the 2 biggest parties here. But one other factor which could be in people's minds is the fact that Northern Ireland hasn't had a devolved government for more than 2 years, because the DUP and Sinn Féin haven't been able to agree a new power sharing arrangement. So there's also questions over whether voters may decide to punish them for that at the ballot box. A couple of interesting local stories on the ground to tell you about. The DUP are fielding their first openly gay candidate, so that's notable for a party with a reputation for being very socially conservative on LGBT issues. And another row, the Ulster Unionist Party have tried to distance themselves from an election leaflet which the Alliance Party said tried to connect them with the IRA. But it is early days here. The full picture expected to be complete actually tomorrow.
All right, Emma, thank you very much indeed. Emma Vardy there, our Ireland correspondent. Now, for more coverage of the election results, with some councils still counting, Hugh Edwards will be back on BBC One this afternoon. That's at 3:30, and we'll be back later in the programme with Norman Smith at Westminster. Back now to our top story, and voters in the English local council elections have apparently punished both the Conservatives and the Labour Party in what appears to be a protest against the Brexit deadlock at Westminster. Let's go back to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. Norman, what should we read into these results?
Well, these results, Ben, may just be the first act of a 2-act drama, with the second act in the form of the European elections set to be an awful lot bloodier, with bodies all over the stage, because last night there were local factors at work as well as Brexit. In the European elections, there's only one issue in town, and it's Brexit. Secondly, of course, Nigel Farage enters the fray with his new Brexit party, no doubt about where he stands, but also Change UK enter with their commitment to another referendum, which leaves the 2 main parties wandering around in no man's land. And lastly, of course, we know European elections, let's be honest, a lot of people not that fussed about them. It's a free hit for many people to abandon their traditional party loyalties. So there is a real possibility, I think, of a seismic shock to the two main parties next week. The big question is whether that shock is enough to jolt the two main parties out of their current deadlock over Brexit.
Norman, many thanks indeed. And a reminder of our main story this lunchtime. The Conservatives and Labour lose hundreds of council seats across England, with voters apparently fed up with the Brexit deadlock at Westminster. That is all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One Now, we'll join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a very good afternoon. Now, let's go back to the results of the local elections. We've been hearing from all the political parties with their reaction to the results, which analysts say do look like a response to national politics and, in particular, a backlash to the deadlock at Westminster over Brexit. Well, this lunchtime, the Prime Minister's been speaking at the Welsh Conservative Conference, and she, as she took to the stage, she faced one heckler who called for her resignation. Let's just have a quick listen. Well, I'm not sure that was the right clip, but we'll try and bring that to you later on. Anyway, the man, that heckler, was escorted out of the hall, and the Prime Minister did continue addressing her party's disappointing local council election results.
Now, this is a difficult time for our party, and these election results are a symptom of that. We have the privilege of governing our party at a momentous time, and we have a responsibility to deliver something truly historic. What is momentous and historic is seldom simple and straightforward. But I think there was a simple message from yesterday's elections to both us and the Labour Party: just get on and deliver Brexit. And I said when I ran to lead our party that Britain can and should make a success of Brexit. Now, that means leaving the EU and setting the UK on a course for a brighter future. The very best way to do that is by leaving with a deal. Now, not everyone agrees. There are some who do not accept the referendum result. They say there should be a second referendum. Their aim is to stop Brexit. I profoundly disagree with them. If you give people a choice and they make a clear decision, you have a duty to act on it. And that means leaving the EU so we can spend our money as we choose, decide our own immigration policy, make our own laws, interpret them in our own courts, and make trade deals around the world. And the deal we've negotiated with the EU delivers that. Yet there are those who want us to give up on it and to leave without a deal. And I disagree with them too. Leaving with the good deal we've negotiated, a deal that works for the UK, is the very best possible outcome. Majorities in 2 nations of our United Kingdom voted to leave. Majorities in the other 2 voted to remain. In Northern Ireland, there's the added challenge of a land border with the EU. So we need a Brexit that works for the whole United Kingdom, and our deal does. Now, Parliament has made it clear that it will do everything in its power to prevent a no-deal exit from happening. That despite 9 out of 10 Conservative MPs backing the deal, because some joined other parties in opposing it, there were not the votes to get it over the line. Some MPs opposed it because they want to stop Brexit. Others because it does not match up to their ideal of what Brexit might be. But politics is the art of the possible. Leaving the EU with a deal that works for Britain is the best possible outcome available to us now. And that's why we're now reaching out across the House of Commons in order to build a majority for Brexit. Our goal is to deliver Brexit so we can move our country forward.
So that was the Prime Minister speaking a little earlier. Let's just go back to that moment just before she spoke, when she was heckled by one Conservative Party activist who called on her to resign.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And
why don't you resign? The National Convention want you. We don't want you.
And Crin Honda.
So there we are. That was the Prime Minister being heckled by one Conservative Party activist calling on her to resign. Well, meanwhile, the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, was challenged this morning on whether it had been a bad night for his party.
We lost 80 councillors. I'm very sorry about that. Thank them for their services. The Conservatives... Wait a minute. Oh, we were very too excited. The Conservatives lost 500 and lost control of a lot of councils. We have won Trafford to an overall majority. We have swings to Labour in a number of boroughs across the whole of councils across the whole of the country, and that gives us a basis on which we can win marginal seats such as Swindon, such as Thurrock, and other places. And I'm looking forward to an election that we do that. But also only half the results have come in yet.
Trafford is the exception of the night, though. You've lost control of Bolsover, you've lost control of Hartlepool, you've lost control of Wirral, Walsall. These are Labour heartlands.
I'm very sorry we lost them. We'll fight back and we'll win them back. That's the whole point behind it. What we are doing here is putting forward an agenda of anti-austerity and also pointing out the local authorities have borne the brunt of the austerity agenda which has been foisted on them by the Conservatives and the Lib Dems when they were in coalition together.
So that was Jeremy Corbyn with his reaction to the results. And we also heard from the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Vince Cable, who spoke to supporters celebrating many gains at Chelmsford in Essex.
Well, I'm just celebrating a really great result here. Chelmsford, Essex, but this story across the country. You know, the Lib Dems were written off at one point, but we're coming back very, very strongly. We're the big winners of the night. You know, throughout the country, you know, rural, urban, cities, suburban, a large number of gains. I don't know whether that was a supporter or an opponent, but it's a bit late now if it's a Guinness. But no, these are the best results so far for 15 years. If we gain another council to the 9 we've already gained, it'll be the best result for a quarter of a century. I'm afraid the bad news is we've got to move on to another election. There's one in 3 weeks' time, so you're going to have to keep working. And the European elections, we're very clear about our message. Every vote for the Liberal Democrats is a vote for stopping Brexit. Absolutely clear, unambiguous, honest. We expect to do well. We are clearly the dominant, successful Remain party, and we expect everybody to get behind us in that important election. So thank you for all the work you've done. Brilliant result, and it's a great result for the party nationally. Thank you very much.
Sir Vince Cable there for the Liberal Democrats. Meanwhile, the co-leader of the Greens, Jonathan Bartley, said the results were phenomenal for his party and the outcome of a lot of hard work. He dismissed suggestions that the Green gains were part of a protest vote.
Well, in the last 9 council elections we've gained in 8. It's been very, very consistent. So over the last 9 years we've gone up and up and up and up to that position as the 4th party now in local government. So we know that this is not a flash in the pan. This is something very, very concrete we've been building and building. Also, we know on the doorsteps, what was going to happen in these elections. We are breaking records. And remember that the base we're coming from was 2015. Those are the comparable elections 4 years ago that we're now fighting those seats again. That was when we had our own record-breaking general election result. So the bar was already very high. And then to have these kind of gains in this kind of context, I think is very, very reassuring and shows how much progress we're making.
Jonathan Bartley, well, speculation now mounting about what could happen in the forthcoming European elections. Professor Tony Travers, who specialises in local government at the London School of Economics, says the degree to which Brexit played a role in today's local council election results is significant.
Well, there is a fascinating hypothetical and something we can't quite answer in these elections. If the Brexit Party and Change UK, the other new party, had stood in these elections, I suspect they'd have damaged the Conservatives and Labour even more than they've been damaged in these elections so far. So I think when we get to the Euro elections, the Brexit Party will do significantly better, this is what the polling shows, than UKIP has done in these elections. And it is fascinating that despite Brexit being an overlay for what are local elections, it looks as if most of the disenchantment with the political system here at Westminster has fractured between the Liberal Democrats, Independents, Greens. It's gone all over the place, but not so much to UKIP.
Tony Travers there with his assessment. Well, in a moment we're going to have all the business news for you. First, a quick look at our latest BBC News headlines. There's been a Brexit backlash in the local elections. Both the Conservatives and the Labour Party have been punished at the polls. The big winners have been the smaller parties like the Liberal Democrats, the Greens and also independent candidates. In other news, one of the most powerful cyclones to hit India for years has battered the northeast coast with winds of over 120 miles an hour. 1 million people have fled their homes.
Afternoon, I'm Jamie Robertson. Business news now. HSBC is prepared for ground for a round of cost cutting. Now that's even as the bank posted a 31% jump in profits. Europe's largest bank made £4.8 billion before tax. That's in 3 months up to March. And it's up from £3.7 billion the same period a year earlier. As the penny finally dropped for the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, the UK Treasury says it will now keep 1 pence and 2 pence coins in circulation, faced a backlash last year when it said the coins were practically obsolete. Despite the rise of contactless payments, 2.2 million people in the UK still reliant on cash, particularly the elderly, the vulnerable and those living in rural areas. The owner of the Lakeside and Trafford Centre shopping centres, Into, has cut its forecast for rental income and it's blamed the retail downturn. Into said 2019 was going to be challenging as due to a rise in rescue deals as stores struggle to pay their rents. Right, now a year ago, the Chancellor Philip Hammond argued that 1 penny and 2 pence coins were obsolete, only good for hoarding in jam jars or even throwing away in some cases. Today he has relented. He said they are not, as we did think for a while, going to be withdrawn. Well, cash has become a big issue for consumers. Many outlets no longer actually accepting cash as a form of payment. Debit cards overtook cash for the first time in 2017. And it's also a problem, though, for rural communities where bank branches have been closing, and also we've seen a reduction in the number of ATMs. Now, let's talk to David Chaplin, who's head of campaigns at Which. Let's go through the first question. Why didn't you get rid of the 1p and 2p piece? I mean, it seems they are a bit obsolete, really, aren't they?
Well, this is a welcome announcement today from the Chancellor Philip Hammond. I think he's actually recognised that many people do rely on cash, and we know that 25 million people say that without cash they would struggle. I mean, at Which we hear stories from people who run small businesses who say that half their transactions are still with cash.
Sorry, I understand that about cash as a concept, fine. But what about 1p and 2p pieces? Because in terms of cash, they are a bit useless, even if you continue with cash.
Well, the announcement on notes and coins is welcome, but actually that's only part of the picture. If we're going to protect the cash infrastructure in the UK, we really need to address the triple challenge that consumers are facing. That's bank branch closures. We know that around 60 a month now are closing. That's the drop-off of free-to-use ATMs, which research this week showed that 2,000 free-to-use ATMs have closed since the beginning of this year. And thirdly, that as many services move online, that actually a lot of people don't have that access to good quality mobile or broadband to make full use of those services. So we really need the government to focus on that issue. now that they've made the announcement about coins and notes.
So I get your argument, but cash really does still have a part to play in society. There are many vulnerable people, many poor people, many rural communities which do rely on it. But I still don't quite understand about where the 1p and 2p comes in. But surely we could just continue with cash quite happily without those 1, 2p pieces, which actually they clog up the system now, don't they?
Well, that's a question you'll have to put to the Chancellor when he comes on your programme. But from Which's perspective, we think that people should have access to cash. And as I said, around 25 million people say that without cash they would struggle. And you might notice that, for example, if you get off the tube and you drop a penny in a charity box, that's something that you wouldn't be able to do if you didn't have those coins.
OK. Now, what about the idea of a cashless society? Do you see that happening? I mean, OK, we're going to have to take our time in getting there. But we're going to get there eventually, aren't we?
Well, a no-cash society does concern some people, but let me be totally clear. We're not against digital payments or online payment systems. Many people use those, and we would like banks, frankly, to do more to help their customers be aware of those services. And that's something that this group, now that the Chancellor has set it up, will need to look at quite urgently, is what steps are industry taking to help their customers deal with this digitisation that's happening in banking?
Well, one of the problems about cash is, of course, it's quite expensive. I mean, it's expensive to run the whole system, transporting the stuff, getting around, renewing it. I mean, not just coins, but also paper money. It takes a bit to look after it all, doesn't it?
That's right, and so far that has happened with consent, but I'm saying what I think we're seeing now is that if these free-to-use ATMs and other banking services continue to close at the rate they have been, that whole infrastructure that you talked about could be at risk. And we know that many people still rely on cash in their everyday lives, so it would be wrong for that change to happen without proper government oversight.
David Chaplin from Which, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just got a few other stories to get across. The founder of Insys Therapeutics, he's John Kapoor. He's become the first pharmaceutical boss to be convicted in a case linked to the US opioid crisis. Now, a Boston jury found Kapoor and 4 colleagues conspired to bribe doctors to prescribe addictive painkillers, often to patients who didn't need them. The former billionaire was found guilty of racketeering conspiracy for his role in a scheme, which also, it is claimed, misled insurers. Shares of vegan burger maker Beyond Meat have soared on their Wall Street debut. Investors are betting on the growing popularity of plant-based foods. Stock closed up 163% on the first day of trading, valuing the California company close to $3.8 billion. Now, the individual shares, they went from $25 to close on 66. And other shares, Adidas, they're up, not as much though, but 7%, it's not bad, after the German sportswear company reported double-digit sales increases in Greater China and e-commerce. Global sales increased 6%, up to £5 billion. Quick look at the markets there. HSB Holdings, because of their figures, and also because they're saying they're going to do cost cutting. If you're cutting costs and you're making lots of money anyway, cutting costs and making lots of money anyway, that's good for your shares. Glencore Extra, that's quite an interesting one. Tesla has been talking about a shortage of minerals, shortage of things like copper, nickel, and they think as a result of that, it's going to be good for the mining shares. Mining shares have been a bit of a doldrums last week or so, and so that news has actually pushed it up because there's a thought there's going to be more demand for it. Pound against euro, pound's a little bit weaker today, not a huge amount, still quite close to its 117 level, and the FTSE up a small amount, not a huge amount. That's business. Back later.
See you then, Jamie. Thank you. Much more about the local elections coming up with our special coverage with Hugh Edwards. Now, though, it is time for a quick look at the latest weather forecast. Here's Louise Lear.